I'm very excited. Again, my name is Steve Greenfield, and I'm the general partner of Automotive Ventures, an early-stage mobility fund based in the US, but investing globally in early-stage technologies across the mobility spectrum. So let's get started. So at the risk of repeating myself, I think it's worthwhile reiterating these two frameworks that I introduced about an hour ago. So first, in terms of how we look at mobility. So the definition that I like is looking at how we move either humans and or cargo across the modalities of land, sea, air, and space. In addition, this framework will be handy to keep in the top of your mind over the next couple of days. And that is 4 different aspects of mobility, being connectivity of vehicles, and we'll talk about the implications of that today as we look into the future. Autonomy, which is a central theme of this conference, and we'll hear many speakers and panelists over the next 3 days talk about autonomy. Car ride and sharing, shared mobility modalities, which we'll talk about today as well. And then finally, last but definitely not least, is electrification. So let's dive in. I think a lot about time, and I think a lot about our ancestors sitting around a fire 2 million years ago, being fascinated with this new discovery. And I think about if these ancestors were up on stage today and had a chance to look around the audience and this room today, what would they think and how would they make sense of the technological progress that has taken place over the last 2 million years? Needless to say, they would probably be very fearful. And those same ancestors would realize that it's only been 85 years in the year 1939 when oil was discovered in Qatar. And I think it's very interesting, the mixture of fire and petroleum products, oil, is effectively how all of us got here today. The internal combustion engine, whether we've flown in or driven in, unless you came in a pure electric vehicle, then chances are you use petroleum products to get here today. And we'll talk today about the evolution, the exciting evolution from using fossil fuels to power human transport and cargo transport to electrification. I also think about these same ancestors 2 million years ago, looking up at the night sky, looking at the stars and trying to make sense of what they're actually looking at. And here we are 2 million years later, and we're on the cusp of conquering and colonizing potentially other planets. So it's very interesting as we juxtapose how much technology progress has been made over the last 2 million years. But it hasn't been a smooth transition. If you look at that, 3 million years ago was the first incidence of humans using tools. 2 million years ago was the first incidence of humans harnessing fire to either cook or heat themselves. And it's really been in the last 200 years that we've seen this acceleration based on the discovery of fossil fuels and the Industrial Revolution. We now have this increasing, accelerated pace of exploration and technology discovery. So let's compress this down and look at actually what's transpired over the last 200 years. The yellow area there is the era in which we're living currently right now. And as we look to the future, whether it is space travel or colonization or the power of harnessing AI to make all of our lives easier, it is an exciting future, but it's also fraught with a lot of anxiety and concern overall. But like all things in life, there's always unintended consequences. So the Industrial Revolution has had some downstream effects. And one of the large downstream effects that we talked about over the next 2 days is the amount of carbon dioxide we're emitting into the atmosphere. And by anybody's account, it's an abnormally high amount of carbon dioxide that we are emitting into the atmosphere, largely because of the Industrial Revolution and the amount of fossil fuels that we're burning. This is one of the promises of moving to cleaner energy and one of the promises moving from internal combustion engines to electrification. And this trend, any way you slice it, is not healthy. The climate is warming. You know, we've had the warmest 12 months over the trailing 12 months that we've ever had in the last 125,000 years. So, and by the way, if you extrapolate that trend out, it does not look good unless it regresses back towards something that looks more like the mean over the last 100,000 years. So we have to do something to control this, and a lot of the promise of controlling this will be through the migration from internal combustion engines to electrification. So if you need a why, if you need a reason for the transition, that chart should encapsulate that reason why. But we are seeing hope. We're already seeing more developed countries like the USA, Russia, and the UK dramatically reducing the amount of carbon they're emitting into the air. So the short-term trend for some of the developing countries looks good. We are seeing some troubling trends within more emerging economies. And you can see here, China, with its population growth, is growing quite quickly and will at some point here likely surpass even the US in terms of the amount of carbon dioxide that they're emitting into the atmosphere. And it's one of the reasons that China 15 years ago strategically decided, let's control the supply chain around most of the world's rare earths and battery technology as well, because we need to get ahead of this curve and make sure, as there is population growth, that we start to control the amount of greenhouse gases we're emitting into the atmosphere. So let's go back to that framework: connectivity, autonomy, shared mobility, and electrification, and let's talk about what we've accomplished and what the status is around each of those. So as we look at vehicle connectivity, as new cars are produced, many more of them are connected to the internet, which enables a lot of exciting technology and use cases going forward. One of which is vehicle to grid. So very topically for today's conversation and tomorrow's conversation, we will talk about harnessing the batteries within vehicles to effectively allow a buffer to supply demand of the grid overall. So as electrical grids are taxed globally because of the amount of electricity that vehicles are drawing, the cars themselves are going to be able to buffer that and potentially allow a consumer who's got a vehicle in their driveway to supply electricity back to the grid. If we look at the vehicle to pedestrian in the lower right, or vehicle to mobile devices, there is a world where vehicles will recognize where pedestrians are and where there's a risk, and actually prevent pedestrian injury and death as a result of that. And we are on the cusp of that as we get more vehicles on the road that are real-time connected. And then on the left-hand side and up above, we've got vehicle-to-vehicle connectivity. And we will talk a lot over the next day and a half, 2 days, about the promise of autonomy, reducing vehicle accidents. But in the upper left-hand corner, equally as exciting is as vehicles can talk to the infrastructure within cities, we can also greatly reduce traffic, which gives all of us back our most precious asset, which is our time, in terms of reducing the amount of traffic that we have to sit in as more vehicles in more cities become a quagmire of traffic problems, especially during rush hour. So let's move to autonomy. It's always great to poke fun at consultants. If we look back, and I don't mean to particularly point out Morgan Stanley in this case, but this was a slide from 2013, where a Morgan Stanley analyst believed that by this point, 10 years later, we would have 100% of all passenger vehicles being fully level 5 autonomous. And as you can see there in the upper right-hand corner, this would promise a quote-unquote utopian society where there were far fewer vehicles. Every vehicle was going to be able to be hailed through a mobile app anytime you wanted the vehicle, fewer cars on the road, and it would open up all kinds of leisure time because none of us would have to drive these vehicles around. Well, here we are 10 years later, and what's happened? Well, a lot of things have happened to prevent full autonomy from being achieved, not the least of which is the technology required. We were probably overly optimistic about what was going to be needed in terms of technology within these vehicles, but also we find in many cases in many countries, humans just aren't quite ready to adopt autonomy yet. So we need to break through both of those barriers, and there'll be a lot of content on stage here over the next 2 days from speakers and panelists discussing and debating what it takes to start really increasing penetration of autonomy. But the promise, if you need a why should we aspire to full autonomy? It's this. In the US last year, there were over 42,000 human deaths because of car accidents. Globally, this number is 1.35 million deaths per year from car accidents. And the promise of full autonomy, when we get there, is that these could effectively be reduced to zero. The cars should be sort of self-aware and aware of other vehicles on the road, and should drive in such a way that we all but eliminate vehicle accidents in the future. If there are vehicle accidents, they're very minor, and we should be able to reduce that 1.35 million deaths per year to almost zero with the promise of autonomy. So on fixed routes, as we just saw outside with the autonomous shuttles, in construction, in mining, and in agriculture, where you don't have human pedestrians in front of vehicles at risk, we found huge technological progress with autonomy. So we are finding that you can effectively run a farm autonomously at this point. There are mines that are effectively being run fully autonomously at this point as well. And on fixed routes where we don't have pedestrians in the way, we can move very, very quickly to autonomy in the short term before we get to full level 5 autonomy for passenger vehicles. And in terms of automation elsewhere, Amazon now is the largest employer globally. And within 2 to 3 years, they will have more robots, automated robots, in their warehouses than they have humans in terms of human employees. So it'll be interesting to see that switch over. And in the future, whether you're on a factory floor or within a warehouse, automation is coming very, very quickly. Automation in the first wave to augment productivity for humans, but overall, longer term will mean we'll actually be able to replace a lot of the repetitive tasks that humans do today with full autonomous robots. So let's move on to sharing, the sharing economy. So this chart shows the cumulative losses over the last 10 years since the beginning of its existence of Uber. And Uber lost $31.5 billion cumulatively in operating losses over the last 10 years. They just, in the end of 2023, had their first profitable quarter. Now, Uber, I would maintain that, remember back to that Morgan Stanley slide, Uber really built a business model under the condition that they believed that full autonomy was coming a lot sooner than it would. And if you remove the driver out of the vehicle, you can actually achieve much less cost per mile served for ride-hailing overall. We'll see if they actually can maintain this profitability going forward. Hopefully, fingers crossed, they can. But if and when we get to full autonomy for ride-hailing overall, the ride-hailing business is going to be much more attractive for those that offer it up. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, we'll talk about electrification. Last year, there were about 14 million passenger vehicles sold globally in terms of being full battery electric vehicles. But the penetration varies quite significantly, as you know, across different countries. So if we look at the 18% of all passenger vehicles last year were electric vehicles, China had the highest penetration in terms of a country. At over 30%. Europe not far behind. The US is lagging. US, where I live today, is lagging largely because consumers are concerned about range anxiety and they're concerned about charging infrastructure, not to mention costs. But we will continue to see in many countries this increase dramatically as battery electric vehicles become a very good replacement substitute for internal combustion engine vehicles. And as you look at back to the environment, when you look at the carbon and greenhouse gas emissions from a battery vehicle versus a historical internal combustion engine vehicle, dramatic differences. You'll see here, in terms of the materials, the mining and the manufacturing of the batteries, actually they're more carbon intensive. So at the point of the new car delivery, the battery vehicle actually has harmed the environment more than the ICE vehicle. But over the lifetime of that ICE vehicle, consuming petrol, fossil fuels, it does a lot more damage to the environment in terms of emitting greenhouse gas emissions than the battery electric vehicle, and the switchover happens shortly after that initial vehicle is delivered. And in terms of battery technology, this is some of the most exciting things that are going on in terms of battery progress. So we've quickly moved through multiple stages to solid state, the promise of solid state batteries. And while solid state batteries seem to be more sophisticated and will be more costly to build and build out, the promise is threefold. One is the charging time should be dramatically less. Two will be the actual range will be dramatically more. And also the volatility, because they don't have any liquid electrolytes, the volatility of these batteries, we should have dramatically fewer fires from these batteries overall. So in terms of storage and also transportation. So the promise right now of solid state is very, very strong, but we need to figure out a way how we can sustainably manufacture these things cost effectively. And as we look at the battery density, or the power density, batteries, even with the progress that we've made on the previous slide, batteries are far less dense in terms of the actual energy per liter versus petroleum products. So we still have a lot to go. One of the reasons why we will not see long-range electrified planes, cargo planes, or passenger planes anytime soon is because of this. I flew from Atlanta on a 13-hour flight. No time soon in my lifetime are we going to be able to replace fossil fuels on that plane as the power plant by electric. But as you'll hear up on stage over the next 2 days, for short trips, we will see more and more electrification in aviation, which is very exciting. So as an investor, I look at that framework, connected, autonomous, shared mobility, and electrification, and we look at making investments that will uniquely alleviate some of the biggest challenges facing humans on the face of the earth. And as I wrap here, one of my favorite quotes about the future is really looking at human frailties and how we fixate so much on the short term. Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, says that we always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that will occur in the next decade. So my challenge to you is this, as I wrap up here, is that over the next 2 days, cast aside anything that you've thought in the past about mobility. Don't fixate. Stay very open-minded, like a mind of a child, as they say, as you listen to presenters and panelists up on stage. And like those ancestors that were crowded around the fire in the cave, let's all think about the next 10 years and think about how we can play a role individually and collectively with making tremendous progress across the areas of connectivity, vehicle connectivity, autonomy, subscription mobility, as well as electrification. And with that, I think we'll go to questions. Thank you.